Ahora sí, lista. Ok, bueno, hoy es sábado 8 de marzo, Día Internacional de la Mujer.
Are we
Sí.
doing this interview in Spanish or in English?
In any language that you feel comfortable.
Okay.
So I may be doing the intro and stuff like that, but we can go in English because the exhibit is going to be in 2 languages.
Okay.
So anything that I write in English is going to be written in Spanish.
Okay.
And if there are clips in English or clips in Spanish, I may have the video have subtitles if it's in English or the other way around. So
Okay.
whatever way you feel more comfortable, that's how we go.
Okay.
I mean, because I think that the beauty of being Latina is that we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're sábado 8 de marzo, Día Internacional de la Mujer, mi primera invitada, Jessica Vega. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so honored to be your first interview.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited that you accepted to come and meet with me. Like I mentioned off the air, this is a project that's dear to my soul and my being, and I respect so much the work that Latinas that have been elected to office go through. So it's important. So thank you so much.
Thank you for doing this. This is incredible.
So let's start just with the basic things to kind of have this for the recording. So your full name is?
My full name is Jessica Vega.
Perfecto. What position were you elected to?
So I was elected in Central Falls City Council for Ward 5 back in 2019 was my first term.
Oh my God!
A 2-year
So
term.
you had the whole COVID.
Yes, I went through COVID. We went through the first Donald Trump administration with the crisis at the border and getting some of those detainees sent to Central Falls, the detention center there. So it was a really crazy time, but it was a very rewarding time because we did a lot of work directly with the community.
Wow. And Ward 5 in Central Falls, what area is that?
So Ward 5 is like going down Lonsdale Avenue.
Gotcha.
So it's the other side of Central Falls,
Yes.
not necessarily where the mayor's office is.
Perfect, perfect. What date were you elected for the first time?
So it was in January 2019. I don't remember the exact date, but it was in January.
Okay, so we'll look at that.
Yeah.
And how long were the terms?
So they're 2-year terms.
Okay.
Yes.
And you ran for 2 terms.
So I ran for 2 terms.
Served 4 years.
So I served 4 years. The last 2 years, I was elected as city council president.
Oh, the first term?
The second term.
The second term?
Yes.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And a lot of work.
It was.
Wow. So
yeah.
we'll get into all that. So I'd like to start talking about the decision to run, like the early stages of, the thinking about doing it, making the decision. When was the first time that you thought about running? What led you to make that decision?
Well, I always credit my grandmother. She was the first social worker I've ever met.
Okay.
So she had no formal training. She didn't go to school. Her dad thought that women belonged in the kitchen and not at school, not learning. But she was someone in the community. We grew up in Central Falls. She was someone in the community who people would go to when they needed help for anything. And at a very early age, I was exposed to adult conversations, and I knew of a lot of her friends who were in domestic violence situations, substance abuse, homelessness. And so I grew up with the understanding that if you can help people, you should help people. So when I graduated college in psychology, I went into the same fields where I was helping people, and I had those direct conversations with families. And what I found was there was a lot of things happening that, yes, had to do with their behaviors, but it was a lot of things happening that were external, that were influencing their behaviors. So for example, how are you going to be a young mother to progress if you get a raise at your job, then you potentially lose your SNAP benefits or your cash assistance? And those moments, especially that interaction, made me think, like, who makes these really dumb policies that don't help families, don't help people. And that really sparked my interest in politics, because that's where a lot of decision-making power happens. And that really impacts just the daily lives that people in my community, um, their daily lives on a daily basis.
So one of the things that I just realized that I didn't ask
Mhm.
that I think is important too as Latinas is, what is your Latino heritage? And were you born in the United States? Were you born in another
So
country?
I was born in Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Yeah, I came here when I was 3 years old. So I don't remember. I remember bits and pieces. Like I remember the first time I saw snow. I did not like it. It was too cold. But I came here at a very young age.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And what part of the Dominican Republic?
Soy de la Romana.
La Romana.
Sí, de la Romana.
Okay. Beautiful beaches.
It is.
So, and you came directly to Central Falls?
We came directly to Central Falls. This is the first place we landed. My mother came here before we did.
Okay.
And we had to stay back in our country for a year because she had to prove that she could take care of us and sponsor us.
Mm-hmm.
So she sent for us afterwards. And the first place we came to was Central Falls. It was always our home.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, what year was that you came?
I want to say maybe 1992, 93.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was about the time that we had the first Latina elected to office in
Oh,
this
wow.
state.
That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, and that's the other kinds of dots that I want to connect.
Yeah.
So, what emotions did you feel when you finally made that decision to run? Because now you've been thinking about it, you've had these role models. Now you say, like, okay, I'm going to do it.
Well, I was terrified. It wasn't a decision I made overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It took me years because I thought to run for office, you had to be a lawyer, you had to be white, and you had to have a lot of money to do it. I did not realize that all you really needed was the backing of your community and have to be authentic and just be yourself. And so I started getting involved with the city council on a school project when I was getting my master's program. And I got to know some of the city council members, and they were very encouraging, like, you should do this. And I was like, I know, that's what I plan to do. And you got to get rid of your fears. You got to get out of your own way. And I did that. And that was the catalyst. That class was the catalyst for me to really get involved in politics.
Wow, that's awesome. And what role did your family and friends play in your decision to run?
Oh, they were super supportive. My mom would go door knocking with me. She would get so offended when people used to like close the door in our faces because like, or people didn't open the door, and I would tell her like, it's okay, it's just one house, we'll get some no's but we'll get a lot of yes. But my mom was very supportive through that. My sister, my nephews and nieces, they would go door knocking with me. My friends would go door knocking with me. Everyone was very supportive, very hands-on.
Did anybody ever say, why are you doing this?
No, they were excited for me. They were like, why not? Like, you've always worked in the community. You love helping people. And this was just a natural progression for me.
What was the biggest obstacle you faced when launching your campaign?
I had an opponent, and the opponent was a mayor previously in Central Falls. So he had name recognition. And he was also kind of a bully throughout my campaign. Like, he showed up, I remember, to one of the reunions I had. He came and was like, who are you? How come I don't know about you? I remember one day I was talking to a constituent, and he drove by his car. He came with his car. He drove by. He stopped, put the window down, stared at me, and then took off. And I was just like, okay. But I didn't take it personally. If not, that gave me more drive to say, I'm really going to beat you, because you're bullying a woman. You're bullying a Latina. And we don't take things lightly. We fight back.
Do you feel that because you were a Latina, it gave him permission to bully you and treat you like that? If it had been a white male, would he have done those kinds of things?
I don't want to speak for what his chain of thought was, but I will say I was campaigning outside of one of the voting districts, voting locations, and him and another white woman who were running for office got upset with me because I was talking Spanish to some of my constituents. So they felt like I was using my Spanish to my advantage. And to me, it's like my community is predominantly Latino. I'm going to speak in Spanish to my Latino community. So they held that against me.
So expand on that, because nowadays, with this whole issue of now the executive order of English as the official language, um, how do you feel that language is an important part of the culture for people who are looking to get involved in running for office?
I think it's so important that we fight back on that. Our language is literally the way we communicate with our community. How are we going to know their needs if we can't communicate with them in a way that they feel comfortable? And language is more than just the words that you speak. There's comfort in that. Mm-hmm. And being able to say, ¿Cómo te puedo ayudar? ¿Qué está pasando? Déjame ayudarte. There's a lot of comfort in that, especially if you're an immigrant to this country.
Would you say that, so you're talking about the advantages, and, language to me is always something that's so personal, and I always make sure that Spanish is spoken. Do you think that it will hurt future candidates who use Spanish to reach the community?
I don't think so. I think you have to stay authentic to who you are, mm-hmm. and you have to represent your community and be proud of that, because you're there to represent them at the end of the day. And if you're not proud of your heritage and where you come from, the people that you're supposed to represent, then you don't belong there.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. So let's talk about the campaign and the election. What were the main challenges you faced as a Latina candidate?
Luckily for me, I came from a very supportive community in Central Falls, mm-hmm. where the majority of the candidates there are not the candidates, sorry, the constituents there are Spanish speaking. Mm-hmm. My ward was a little more diverse though. Mm-hmm. So I did have white folks there, but I was able to connect with them. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, when you're talking a common language of like, what are the needs of the community, and you're focusing on that, people mm-hmm. are able to connect with you. So I'm lucky and I'm privileged that way, because I recognize that's not all Latina candidates' experiences. Right. But I'm lucky because I was able to run in Central Falls, and we were in a city where the majority of the city council was Spanish speaking as well, were Latinos. Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a technical part about running, right? Mm-hmm. The knowing when to file, where to file, what to do, when to do it, the signature collection, the, talking to the media, or the different strategies and things. Did you have somebody walking you through that, or did you kind of learn it as you went?
I learned as I went. It was trial and error. I did a lot of research. I did fellowship programs that taught you a little bit about like how to talk, like media training. But I learned as I went, and I learned from a lot of mistakes. Like, oh, maybe next time I wear this instead of that, or maybe I should have said this instead of that. So unless you go through like a full-blown training to how to become an elected official, you're really just learning by trial. And you just have to learn how to forgive yourself when you make those mistakes. And hopefully you don't make big mistakes like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think about, knowing when to file the financials, yep. knowing when to, the whole signature thing. Like, did you have somebody that you were able to ask those things, or did you just like figure it out?
So I did some research on my own, and I did have folks who would like set me like, hey, Jess, by the way, this is what you need to do. Samara Rivera was very supportive. She was then a city council person, but she was very supportive and letting me know when things were due, and helping me with the nomination papers and things like that. So I had a pretty decent understanding of like what to do next.
Did you feel at any moment during the campaign, because they can be brutal, did you ever think about quitting? And what kept you going?
I didn't think about quitting, actually, because I knew that's what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I was so tunnel vision, so determined. Like, I used to walk by myself and campaign all the time. Like Saturday morning, I'm going to walk 4 hours. I'm going to do these streets. And it was just me by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I would come home after work and I'm like, I'm going to walk for 2 hours before the sunset. I was very determined because I knew that I could create change and I knew I could be supportive to this community. So there was never a moment when I doubted myself. I did have nightmares that I lost my campaign, which were very upsetting, but I'm like, no, you got this. You got this. That was always my motto, like, keep going, keep pushing,
That's
keep
awesome.
pushing.
What was the most unexpected or surprising experience you had while campaigning?
That's a great question. Huh. I would have to think about that a little bit more.
Okay, you can come back to it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, I mean, there are things that happen that, you never know. And it's like you think back on it and it's like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Um, so, talking about victory and then taking office, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now we've got about the thought about running,
Mm-hmm.
the finally making the
Yep.
decision, the campaign, the winning. Um, how did you feel that moment you found out you had won?
I gasped. I was like, to be honest, that day, like, I was just like, I don't know how this is going to go. I'm just going to pray. I did all I can. That's all I could do. But I gasped and was incredible. Not to get ahead, but I ended up winning with 76% of the vote for my
Wow.
first campaign.
Well, I was going to ask you that. That's amazing.
Yes, I ended up winning. Like, I had a feeling I had this because I worked so hard and I knew he wasn't. I was like, I'm going to outwork you. You might have the name recognition, but you don't have the work ethic I have.
Well, and I think that that's, also an important part of this conversation, that he may have, the candidate may have underestimated you,
Yes.
right? Talk a little bit about that.
I think he felt really comfortable because he was part of the good old boys club. Um, he went to school with a lot of the constituents. He grew up with them. He was the mayor at one point of Central Falls. He was a city councilman. So he knew a lot of people. So he had that. He had that advantage over me. But I knew that he wasn't working as hard as me. And I think sometimes when people are in office for so long, they tend to take things for granted. Um, and that just wasn't my mindset. My mindset was, I'm going to outwork you.
Do you think that, I don't remember when that person was in office, but from that time until when you ran, the community had changed a lot.
Yes.
So, did that have an advantage on your success in winning?
Absolutely. I think so too. He didn't reflect the community. I don't think he reflected the values of the community. He's the reason, or part of the reason, why we have a detention facility in Central Falls. When he was mayor, he was the one who made that decision. When he was mayor, that's when the state took over Central Falls as well.
The
So
schools.
the schools,
Mhm.
yes. Yes, the school system. So I don't believe he maneuvered or worked in the best interest of the community. And with such the demographic changes and then the language barriers and the values, I just feel like he needed to go. It was time for some change in the community.
So when you win in 2019, there had been other Latinos elected to office
Yes.
in Central Falls. Had there been women that were elected to office?
Yes. So the woman there at the time, she was the only woman on the council. No, she wasn't the only woman on the council. I need to correct myself. But when I was running, Carlene Fonseca,
Okay.
Cape Verdean heritage,
Okay.
and Maria Rivera, Puerto Rican heritage,
Okay.
who were on the council.
Okay, but Latinoamericana, only Maria.
Only Maria.
Okay, and Maria was the first council
President.
Latina.
She was the first Latina council president.
Okay, was there a Latina before her?
Who was a council president? No.
Or who was a council person?
I don't think so.
Pro-
Yes, Stephanie Gonzalez.
Okay, Stephanie. Yes, she's in my list. So, okay, so Stephanie and Maria, and you. Was there another Latina that ran the time that you ran?
No.
Okay. And Maria, is that the year that Maria ran for mayor?
She ran my second term for mayor.
Okay, so that first time you had two Latinas.
Yep, she was the council president when in 2019 she got elected. We elected her as city council president.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, do you feel that because there were more Latinas, there was something different in the electoral process?
I think Latinas and women in general, we lead differently. I feel like we lead more with our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
We're naturally more caring and
Mm-hmm.
more attuned to what the community needs. Um, so I definitely think there was a difference there because women just lead differently.
Right, right. And that's what I'm trying to get to is that, Latina politics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what are, like, if you could think about two things that you think that a Latina elected to office does different than a white woman, than men, and even Latinos,
Mm-hmm.
Latino men,
Yeah.
what
Two
would that
things that we
be?
do differently. I think we listen more.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're better at listening. And I think because we're good listeners, we're better at connecting with people.
Mm,
I think we're more approachable
mm.
because we're such good listeners. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Latinas are more underestimated in politics?
Oh yeah, I think people don't see us as a threat until we're there. When I think of like AOC and even Mayor Rivera, I don't think people think of us as threat until we actually lead, and they're just like, oh wow, like she's actually a powerhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. How did your life change immediately after winning the election?
It got much more busier. It got a lot more busier. I think it was strange for me, like my circle of friends change. I
Talk
kept
about
my
that.
my old friends, of course, but you get to know a lot more people.
Mm-hmm.
You attend a lot more networking events. You're privileged to more conversations that like you would never have been in the room if you're not part of the political circle. Which is good and bad because I feel like information should be shared with access. Should everyone should have access.
Right.
Your connections change. Never in my life was I ever invited to a gala. Like that wasn't my life before getting elected. It was like things like that I was thrown into, but also it was making really tough decisions
Mm.
that, and I was always mindful of that. Like I was always mindful about the things that I said and the decisions that I made because I knew it was going to impact people directly.
Now, one of the things that I've observed in a lot of people that are elected is that almost instant when you know that you've won and now you're an elected official, you're still not in office, but things change
Yep.
like pretty fast,
Yes.
right? Who becomes kind of like your circle to guide you in what's going to happen next? Because then it's kind of like even though you had friends or people you knew, it's a different relationship now because
Mm-hmm.
now you're going to be swearing into office and stuff.
Yeah. To be honest, that's one of the things I struggled with was like building that cabinet of people
Mm,
because I was so green. I
mm,
didn't really know who to lean on a lot of the times. So I had to figure things out on my own.
mm,
Um, which was really challenging. Like I looking back, I would have liked to pick a team of people to really guide me because it was I would call people like, this is happening. What should I do? But I didn't have a core team of people, which I feel like looking back, that's one of the things that was missing from my whole experience because nobody teaches you how to govern.
right,
You learn about running for office, that's the easy part, but getting into office and learning how to govern, that's very challenging.
right. And that's where I want to kind of focus on um, in the conversation and in the research because I find that when a white guy wins, he automatically has
Mm-hmm.
people that are going to come and they're advising him. He probably already plays golf with them or has a
Right.
cigar with them or hangs out with them at the bar or whatever. And Latinas don't seem to have that.
Right.
So that would be something that would be important to have as Latinas who are in that position.
Absolutely. One of the things that I did for as far as like legislation, because people expect you to be an expert of everything when you're elected official, and that's
Right.
not the truth. I'm not an expert in housing
Right.
or all these other things. So I would lean a lot on like community activists in the realm of like housing or different things that are happening in the community. So I would lean a lot on like nonprofits and the ACLU and folks like that. But to have like a core team of advisors, the ones that you're talking about, that didn't exist because like my connections that I had weren't people in high level offices.
Right.
I might have that now, but when I
Right.
was starting, that wasn't the case.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then people start calling you councilwoman.
That was so weird. I had a hard time owning that. Like I would just say, call me Jess. It's okay. Because I wanted to be seen. I didn't want to be seen separate from people. I'm still one of you. But I remember someone telling me, like, you worked for it. You need to own it. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I need to own the title.
And that's another thing that I think is important. Like I immediately, when a friend, even a close friend, becomes an elected office, I never call them back by their name. And it is a form of respect.
Yeah.
Right? Because we would dare call a white man by his first name if he's an elected official.
Right.
Or if he was an elected official.
Right.
So it's something that I think that we as Latinas feel like, oh no, just call
We're
me
too
that.
modest
Right?
sometimes. It's like we can't. Sometimes we have to leave the humble pie and like take the bull by the horns. That expression.
Yeah, and I feel it's so important to respect that.
Yeah.
Because it's part of what the community honors.
Right.
And in having our people in those positions.
Yeah.
So, Councilwoman, thank you so much for being here. But I still have more questions. So, what did you feel on the day you were officially elected, sworn into office?
I was like over the moon. I felt like I can't believe this is happening. I was so just overwhelmed with like gratitude and joy and seeing my family's there and my nieces and nephews who were really young at the time. It was an incredible experience. Funny story, I struggled with my shoes because when I brought them, I think I brought two left shoes.
Oh no.
So I was also in pain that day, but I struggled through it. I was too excited that I didn't even care about my toes.
Do you think Latinas have to have the additional having to take care of their image more than guys or white women?
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely pressure to look a certain way. I think society in general puts a lot of pressure on women, but when you're in the spotlight, like you have to look presentable, whatever that means.
Right. And that struggle of, you know, because like we talked before, the underestimation of what we can do and stuff.
So you have to feel like you have to play this part, and part of that role is you have to make sure you look good and like you look sharp, or you look professional.
Right.
Again, whatever that means to get that respect. Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, a guy will go in the sneakers and jeans and a t-shirt, and there's still gonna be
people will still respect them. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember any advice given to you when you took office that you still apply in your career, in your life?
A supervisor once told me, and this was like even before I was thinking about running for politics, but I used to talk politics with him all the time because it's just my passion. And he would just say how it's so important when you're in a leadership position to always make the right decision
Mm.
to your best of your ability. Because once you make a corrupt move or a wrong decision intentionally, you'll continue to make more to cover up for those mistakes. So there was that warning there, like always do the right thing. And I always took that to heart.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when, do you feel there are a lot more eyes on Latinas, like waiting for them to fail or to make a mistake or something so it can be highlighted?
You always have to prove yourself. It could be a little exhausting, but you always have to be on, and you always have to make sure that you're doing the right thing if you're a good candidate who cares about people. But yeah, there's a lot more pressure I feel on Latinas to perform. They're much more forgiven to men.
Right, right. It's like if you look back in not too long history in Rhode Island at least, if there's been a guy who made some mistake, a white guy, it may not even stay in the news that long, but when it's Latina or Latino, we've had that experience not too long ago, it almost stays as the catalyst for that person.
Yeah, and not only that, but we're living in a climate where there's this whole DEI thing
right now,
and people are looking at people of color in position of power as you didn't earn it, right? Or if something happens, it's because you're a DEI hire.
Right.
You're not qualified, which what you're saying is you're inferior because of who you are. And that we're getting the message loud and clear. And I think it was always there, but it's
giving
it's
permission.
loud. It's given permission to say it out loud now.
Yeah. Looking back, did you feel prepared for the role? Were there any surprises along the way?
Prepared in a sense that I knew I could do the work if given the right tools. Did I always have the right tools? I don't think so. Because again, nobody teaches you how to govern. So I sat a lot and I needed to process a lot of things before making decisions. It took me a little longer.
Did you find that people treat you different from before ever being elected to office to after, of course, being elected to office, and even now that you're not an elected official anymore?
Yeah, I think it shouldn't be this way, but I think people respect you more when you have titles. You have more access to things, more access to people. And again, I feel like it shouldn't be that way. We should all have access. Right. So I think that's changed. And not being in office, it's definitely a dynamic change too. Like you're not privy to a lot of conversations that you used to be privy to.
Right, right. How did you handle criticism or negative comments when you were in office?
It depends where they were coming from. So I sponsored an ordinance that would make sure that our police officers wouldn't necessarily adhere to ICE orders unless it was a judicial warrant. So we were like the first before all this because we were part of the first Trump administration. And in the Valley Breeze, a lot of people, you could write comments, and a lot of people were writing into the newspaper saying things like, if you want to live in a drug-ran city, move to Central Falls because Councilwoman Vega is letting all these criminals get away with everything. Like I read those comments and that was really hard. But I was also like, I did the right thing. But then there was also like sometimes comments from constituents who would be upset about something. And those were a little tougher because things are not always that black and white. So you think you're doing the right thing and then you realize, oh, there might be unintended consequences to these things that I didn't think about.
Did you ever feel that your voice wasn't taken seriously because of being Latina?
No, and I think it was because we had a city council president who was a woman, and she made sure that what I had to say mattered and that I had a platform. And I think maybe if it was a male, I don't think I would have had the same thing.
Right.
But because she was a city council president and she was a woman, I felt like she was always very intentional with making sure, like, what do you think about this, Jess? Yeah.
And I think that that makes, looking at those things, right? Being in an elected position where there was other Latinas, and especially a Latina president,
Mm-hmm.
made things or more comfortable for you as a Latina,
Yes.
right? Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think we've touched a little bit about the fact that being Latina, being more empathetic, but now we're talking about more Latinas in leadership where like making decisions and governing together.
Exactly. It's nice. It's a comfort thing. Like, it's nice to, I know that I could text this person or call this person and bounce ideas of each other or be like, did you see what just happened? Did he just say that? And just have those conversations. There's comfort in that. And we supported each other.
And that's interesting because it all, I always see politics when I imagine, let's say the General Assembly or Congress or something, the white men who are majority, at a cigar bar
Mm-hmm.
or playing golf or doing all these male oriented things. And nobody ever thinks anything of
Right.
that, right? And now you are in a position where there are other Latinas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did you ever think about those things or wonder about those things or feel like, thank God there are other Latinas that we have this community or this?
Yeah. I think it was a more, thank God, there's Latinas here. And I was very happy that we had a woman council president who was Latina because she gets it. She's very in tune to the community. Um, and she's really good at sharing power. Um, and then I also had friends who were elected in Cranston, Lamas Vargas, who's now a senator.
Right.
Going to her fundraisers, like we would go to each other's fundraisers and things like that and events. And there was comfort in knowing that you have my back, I have your back.
That's really cool. Um, Talking about and expanding because now what you're talking about is now you're having Latinas in other
Yes.
cities and towns who are elected to office in different positions. What do you guys talk? Do you ever talk about the fact that you're Latinas in these positions?
Yeah. And their experiences differed so, like, I'm not going to name their their cities,
No.
but some of their cities were very challenging. The way their city council members were made up was very different from Central Falls. So some of the stories that I would hear them and saying and the challenges, I'm like, I can't imagine. And this is definitely happening to you because you're a Latina and because you're a woman. So it was a lot of like stories of just feeling unheard or silent or not taken serious, which I'm so grateful I didn't feel like that was my experience in Central
Right.
Falls.
Yeah, and I think that that's a privilege that you have uh, grown up in a city like Central Falls where you have a lot more people that have similar experiences
Right.
of being immigrants, of being speaking other languages, having other cultures. So although it was difficult for Latinos to earn elected positions, once Latinos got there was more
Mm-hmm.
that ability. Do you think that the non-Latinos in Central Falls have any um, what's the word? Like feel like, oh, now it's all Latinos. Like it may have been at one time like, oh, it's all Irish or all French Canadians or something.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are people like thinking like, oh, they're all Latinos?
Oh yeah, and you had asked me earlier where some of the surprises I got when I was store knocking and um, hearing people directly say those things out loud and feeling comfortable to say that to me, like, oh, these people just come here and they don't really understand our culture. There was definitely some resentment on the cultural shift of Central Falls that I noticed from some constituents who didn't feel comfortable, or they saw a kid in their neighborhood with a hoodie and he looked suspicious. Like, those things were said to me, and I would always challenge their thoughts. Like, what about him exactly looks suspicious to you? What about these people exactly bothers you? So I wasn't afraid to go there and have those conversations, and I could kind of see them pedaling back, because it's like, well, I know where you're going, but I want you to hear what you're saying out loud. So that was very surprising to kind of hear some of the resentment that was brewing in the community as well when it came to Latinos.
Do you have any perception of whether some of those feelings of those constituents may have shifted after they got to see the governance that, in your style in an elected position?
I think so, because they would invite me to their homes. They would come to my campaign fundraisers. So they were like happy.
Okay.
Like, oh, she's here to govern everyone, not just a certain group of people, even though Latinos and people of color, low income community are my priorities, but everyone who lives in Central Falls is my priority, regardless of the ward that they live in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's I think also something that's important. I want to find out from these conversations if the shift or that people experience when there is a Latina in office is a positive one.
Yeah.
So having that, uh, it's really trying to find out what is it that, uh, instead of looking at the negative of Latinas in office, it's like, wow, things change for the better. We're heard. We are invited. We're engaged. Things are changing. So
Yeah, I think they were just surprised about how responsive I was. Um, again, I never took the position lightly. I was always very responsive to people.
Right.
I think that helped.
And it's not to generate, and that's why I want to hear from
Yeah.
all the women
Absolutely.
if they've experienced that. So now talking about inspiration and future. What inspired you during challenging times when you were elected to office to keep going?
What inspired me was the young people that I got to work with. I love working with young people. I just feel like they have so many great ideas. They aren't jaded like adults. Sometimes we always say, like, we see the no, and young people see the possibilities. They see the opportunities. So working with the young people there, building out a participatory budgeting class in Central Falls, like, it was one of the most rewarding experience of my time there, just really working with the community. And the young people inspired me, because I'm like, if I could get you to see the power, your political power, then I'm doing something right. Because then you're showing up to the city council budget hearings and you're listening.
Right.
You're talking to your peers. You're running campaigns yourself. Like, to me, that's power.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Who've been your biggest influences or mentors during that journey?
My biggest influences and mentors towards that journey,
or in that when
I was in there.
Yeah.
I always remembered my grandma, my mother, and honestly, I was inspired by all the Latinas who were in positions of power. People who were running around the same time, and then we all went together. That was pretty cool.
Was there ever like a Latina gathering where you'd all come together?
We should have done that.
I always felt of creating that kind of group of y'all to like come together and just close doors, PJs, nobody around, and just be able to share experiences and ideas, or just vent in uncensored spaces. So
I wish that was there. I wish we could create something like that. That would be wonderful. But to see like friends that I knew before getting into office, and all of a sudden we're all elected into office around the same time, it was like, wow, we made it. We're doing it. We're actually doing it. It was pretty powerful.
That's awesome. How do you see the future of Latinas in Rhode Island politics?
I think it's only up from here. I'm really excited. I mean, we have someone who's statewide who got appointed the first time, but then actually won her election the second time.
And before we had another one, Secretary of State.
We had a Secretary of State, Nelly Gorbea. I want a governor who's Latina. I would love to see Rhode Island would change completely if we had a Latina governor. Just the incredible things that could happen in that office.
Mm-hmm.
But I think doors are only opening, and we're here to stay.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. What message would you give to young Latinas who aspire to follow you in your footsteps?
As cliche as it sounds, is don't give up.
Mm-hmm.
Work hard for it, because nobody else is going to run your campaign but you. You have to run your campaign. You're the candidate. And don't doubt yourself. There's going to be moments where things are going to get rocky, but don't doubt yourself. Listen to your intuition and stay authentic to your community.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. If you could go back in time, would you do anything different in your political campaign?
I think in my political campaign, I think I would have tried harder or asked more questions to build that core team, to get more guidance. Because I think that was missing, and I had to, again, trial and error. And I think a lot of the mistakes or things could have run a little bit smoother if I had a core team around me.
Now, you ran for 2 terms.
Yes.
You didn't run again. Was there a term limit, or
There
was it
wasn't
a
a term
decision?
limit. It was a decision to get some work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I needed to step back and take a break from that to figure out what I wanted to do with my life before going back into politics, which I do want to do eventually.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. If you're planning on going back to politics as an elected official.
Eventually, yes. Eventually, yes. That's my dream. I'd love to do it.
Governor?
Maybe.
Hey.
It might take me a couple of years, but I don't shy away from opportunities.
Do you think Latinas think about running for office in a different way than men do?
I think we hesitate a little bit more. I think sometimes we need other people to tell us or give us permission and say, like, you could do this, instead of like believing in ourselves immediately. Because I feel like men are like, yeah, I could do this. Why not? And I think women, we kind of have to like, should I? Could I? I think sometimes we go through those doubts where men probably don't think twice about it.
Now, you talked about having a lot of support from the beginning. Nobody like challenged you or questioned you. But do you think then in other positions and in other cities where it's a little bit harder that when Latinas decide to run, there's a lot more pushback or more doubt implanted in them and all that?
Absolutely. I think Rhode Island is very unique. I think sometimes we only think about the four urban core cities, but there's, counties like Barrington or Coventry or like Woonsocket and places like that we don't necessarily, not many Latinos live there, but it would be challenging for a Latino to run there.
But even in Providence or whatever, like, there's always that, how are you going to do that if you have the kids and you have a job and you have a husband and all these things, like putting all those questions in your mind, that how could you do that if you have all these other responsibilities?
Right.
Do you think that Latinas are showing that they can do more?
Absolutely. We can do more. I think like even Latinas who are not in office, they have kids, they have husbands, they have houses, and sometimes they're working 2 or 3 jobs and managing it all the same. And it's like, we could do these things and we could do them right and have real impact.
Anything else you want to add? Something that we may not have touched, something that you want to share, an anecdote of something that you remember that was either special or that was unexpected, somebody you may have met because you were in elected office that, was really inspiring and stuff. I know that a lot of the opportunities that you have when you're elected to office are really great and open up doors.
They do open up a lot of doors. I guess the only thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about was like really getting into the governing part of things. and
So talking about like bills or ordinances that you worked on that were
yeah,
important.
more so. So when I got elected into office 2019, there was a crisis at the border where families were being
Yeah.
um, removed,
Yes.
set apart, um,
Separated.
separated. Thank you. That's the word. So we ended up getting, I think, over 100 detainees at the Central Falls detention facility
Yeah.
from the border, and we fought back. We made a lot of noise. We were able to reverse the decision, and at the moment, I thought like that was the right decision, and I still think ultimately it was. But it was a really hard decision. Like after the reversal happened, I had like a breakdown in my car because I thought of, are we sending these people to a place that's worse? At least in Central Falls, we know that we're here. The city council members care. We'll make sure that we don't have control over the detention facility, but we have eyes on them and they know it. So they're more apt to do the right thing. Or did we send them to a private facility where conditions are much worse? So I had those thoughts running through my mind, like, did we really make the right decision? Ultimately, we don't want the detention facility in our community at all. But in that moment, like, when they say making the right decision is really difficult, it is. Because again, like I think about that a lot. Like, did we send these people to a place that was much worse?
Right, because it wasn't that you won in getting them free. It was that they were sent to somewhere else, but they were still being detained.
Yes. So that was a really hard decision to make.
What other decisions that in those 4 years that may have marked you in a way because it was something positive that changed the community. It was something that a constituent brought to you, and you were able to do something.
Yeah, I think ending with the positive. We did a housing trust. I think that was the name of the ordinance, where if the developer wanted a tax break, they would have to like pay into this fund where that money would be used for down payment assistance for people who wanted to buy homes in the community. We reversed a curfew that was put on young people because we think Black and brown kids shouldn't be punished
for the color of their skin.
Not that that was necessarily the intent, but that's the unintended consequences of that, right?
What was the curfew for?
They just couldn't stay out after a certain time.
But why was it imposed in the first place?
I don't remember because I wasn't there when that decision was made. I think it had something to do with there was like an uptick in violence at that time.
So instead of engaging them and doing things to keep them busy,
we were criminalizing. Yes, that's exactly what we were doing. Yeah, kids weren't necessarily being stopped by the police because we also had a Latino Mayor Dios at the time, who was really great. But the fact that it was there and that administrations change all the time and someone could have taken advantage of that was a problem. So we were able to reverse that.
Yeah. In the second term, you become the
council
president.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Was it something you sought? Was it something that you were kind of like, you were the person for it for whatever reason? How did that happen?
It was definitely something I sought out because I knew I could do it. I think I worked really hard on the council, and I said, why not?
Yeah.
It's, again, like, why doubt myself?
Right.
Yeah. It's a whole different experience from being a city council person.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about that because you probably have a lot more meetings and
there's a lot more meetings,
more information and decisions.
Yeah, there's a lot more meetings, a lot more decisions, a lot more managing personalities, I would say, because everyone has their own agendas, and not necessarily in a bad way, but people have their own agendas and things that they want to work on. So it was also managing a lot of like expectations.
I kind of think and feel about, I was commissioned on the Board of Licenses in the city of Providence, and you always think about times when you have to like be really tough on people or those, make decisions that are very controversial, but again, you're making the decision based on what's best for everybody. Was there instances like that when you were uh, in
Oh,
office?
I'm sure there were. I can't think of any at the moment, but I'm sure there definitely were moments. I know I definitely had to have a lot of conversations with council members to bring on board with things.
Mm,
Um, Unfortunately, we always were kind of like all wanted the best for the city. How we got to the best, it was always everyone had kind of like their own different ideas of
right,
how to do
right,
that.
right,
Mm-hmm.
right. Well, I think I've asked. If I have anything else, I'll give you a call. But
Yeah.
I think that I have a lot of information. Let me just. I'm thinking about the process of learning how government worked. Right? Like, okay, because you go in, you're elected to office, you have the meetings and stuff. The learning how of what you do in not in the community, but what you do legally. How did that happen?
Oh man, that
Right?
was
Because I think that
that
that's
was hard. Yeah. I didn't know. I learned by trial and error. I learned through Mayor Rivera, who was the council president at the time, and Jonathan Acosta, who was a city council member. I would lean very heavily on them.
okay.
I remember my first budget hearing.
Okay.
I got this document with all these numbers, and I'm just like, I don't know how to read this. What am I supposed to do with
Right.
this?
Right.
And so someone sat down with me and taught me how to go through it. But it's like, if you don't ask, like people just assume you know these things. It's
Right.
just like, no, I'm just someone from the community who really is passionate, but I don't know anything about finances. And I had to learn very quickly.
That and then also like the process in which
The Roberts Rule of Order. Yes. All that stuff is like you kind of learn on the fly.
right and then when you have an idea of a an ordinance or something, the process from your thought until
Like
it's
who?
who writes
Yep.
it, how is it presented, how
Hmm.
like there's a whole process for that. Also, that's learning it on the job.
Yep.
So there almost seems like if there was a school or something that could coach you and train you on that would be
That would be so good. That'd be so great. Yeah.
because I think that sometimes those are the challenges that scare people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right,
The details. It scares people. Like, I don't know if I could do this because it looks really hard from the outside. Once you learn, you'll get the hang of it.
right.
But yeah, it's a learning curve.
But then at the same time, it's good. Well, it's good. You had a supportive council
Yes.
and mayor, but if I can imagine if you're in a city or a town where you don't have that
Right.
support, you could be left without any knowledge and figuring out maybe a
Right.
lot harder, like who to
Exactly.
talk to and who to trust.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. And you don't want to be seen as like
I don't know.
dumb, like
Right.
I don't know what I'm doing, especially if you're, again, the only one, the only Latina there, or the only woman there. It can be very challenging.
So it almost seems that some of the, I would say, let's say, if you think about three things that you would recommend to help Latinas become successful in governing, would probably be, and you talked a little bit about this, the uh, creating that group,
That team.
that team
Hmm.
that's going to be your cabinet, your trusted friends, your advisors that know how things work.
Yeah.
What would be the other one?
The other one is to try to learn those